Hi, welcome to the Ellis Talker Show. I'm DV LeBron. Before we get started, I want to go ahead and tell you if you need insurance for your car, home, any kind of insurance, Miss Andrea Walton, our local State Farm agent, will be more than happy to help you. I appreciate her sponsorship. So today I have Miss Dr. Carol Swain. She is a retired professor from Vanderbilt and a political scientist and all around guru that I've been watching for years. Ma'am, thank you so much for coming on my show.
Thank you. And I'm also a distinguished senior fellow for constitutional studies for the Texas Public Policy Foundation.
Thank you, ma'am. I know that you've done a lot and you're highly decorated. I'm humbled that you've come on because of the topic that I'm going to cover. Um, Miss Dr. Carol Swain has actually written a book on CRT and how it's affecting America, and it's called Black Eye to America. And so I wanted to bring her on to because there's been discussions about what's going on in our local schools about CRT. Some people saying, "Oh, you don't know what CRT is. No, it's not in our schools, etc." So I wanted to bring an expert, a professional, an academic to go ahead and talk about that. So first, what I'd like to do, Doc, is give you introduction, if you'd like to introduce you to the people of Ellis County, and then I want to get into that
So,
question.
this is my book, Black Eye for America: How Critical Race Theory is Burning Down the House. And it is one of a number of books I've written. This book is different because it was very much addressed to the American people. And in the last few years, my books have been geared towards everyday Americans rather than scholars like political scientists. And as way of background, I was a university professor at Princeton and Vanderbilt combined for about 28 years. But I started life as a high school dropout, one of 12 children born and raised in rural poverty in southwestern Virginia. I earned a high school equivalency, went to a community college, and got the first of five college and university degrees. I graduated magna cum laude with my bachelor's degree. I was steered into academia, and I was very successful as a university professor, earning early tenure at Princeton, winning national prizes. And later in life, I had a Christian conversion experience. I gradually became more involved in uh, politics as an activist, and I left academia in 2017. So that's my background. I did not see myself getting involved in educational issues. The rise of CRT, the parent movement, the parent rights movement that started taking place after the COVID lockdowns, I was gradually sort of pulled into that. And I spend a lot of my time now strategizing with parent groups across our nation.
Yeah, I've seen that you've done a lot of work with that. So can you kind of for the viewers, because this question always come up, what is CRT? Just let's define it before we go into it.
Well, first of all, the focus critical race theory. A lot of people heard that for the first time after George Floyd's death, but it is actually connected with critical theory, which is an umbrella term that has Marxist roots. And so, critical race theory is one of many different subcategories that came out of critical theory. And critical race theory, I would argue that it is a worldview that has Marxist roots that came from German scholars known as the Frankfurt School. They fled Nazi Germany in the 1930s. They set up camp at Columbia University as professors, and their ideas are spread across the nation. My definition for critical race theory in the book Black Eye for America, I describe it um, as a racist worldview that argues that racism is in the DNA of American institutions and white people in particular. It describes all white people as oppressors and all racial and ethnic minorities as victims. And it argues that only white people can be racist, so only white people have a need to be anti racist. It also argues that racism is permanent and that white people have to acknowledge that they benefit from whiteness, that their whiteness is a form of property, and that they must engage in the lifelong work of fighting racism, and that racism is at the core. They would argue that any white person that argues, I'm not a racist, my ancestors were abolitionists, they operated the Underground Railroad, they gave millions of dollars to set up black colleges and universities. Doesn't matter. According to critical race theory, you have blood guilt in all of your ancestors. So this is a racist worldview that I argue in my book. It runs counter to traditional American values, our civil rights laws that prohibit discrimination on the basis of race, sex, national origin, color, and religion, as well as our Constitution's Equal Protection Clause.
Yeah. And you are in the book, you talk about, like you mentioned, Marxism. And Marx, when you say Marxism, some people kind of go blank. Now, in your book, you said that they replaced the traditional definition of Marxism, which applies to economics, and made it into a social thing, but kept the principle.
Well,
Can
let
you
me
kind
talk
of?
about that.
Yeah, that's good.
The Frankfurt School. And these were scholars that fled from Hitler in the 1930s in Nazi Germany that came to the United States. And these scholars were disciples of Karl Marx. Many of them were disciples of Karl Marx. And they tried to understand why his economic theory, where the proletariat, the worker, would rise up and overthrow the capitalist class, why that never manifested itself when the conditions were there. Karl Marx's theory in the Communist Manifesto failed. And so one of the early scholars, Antonio Gramsci, he was a member of the Frankfurt School. He coined the term cultural hegemony. And he argued that there was something about the culture in Western societies that prevented people from rising up. And he and others pointed to Christianity in particular. And with cultural Marxism, the argument is that you have to first change the institutions from within. So whether we're talking about the family, the church, the government, the any of the institutions of our society, the media, all of these things have to be changed from within. And I think it was Lenin talked about the slow march through the institutions. What Marxists have done, and these you can call them neo-Marxists if you want to, is that they have gone into organizations and institutions, starting with the Catholic Church. They have infiltrated, they have deceived, they have manipulated, and they've been able to get a foothold in our major institutions. And so we find them transforming the church, transforming our public schools, transforming our government, transforming what is a family. They have talked about, deconstructing, dismantling traditional institutions like the family and replacing it with, God only knows. You see some of the things that they're trying to replace it with. But the cultural Marxists were disciples of Karl Marx. When his economic theory failed, they tried to figure out why, and they came up with this concept of cultural hegemony and also a strategy of infiltrating traditions and dismantling them from the inside. And the critical part has to do with the whole focus is on criticizing everything that exists, every traditional organization, every traditional way of life, such as the marriage, such as the family, such as the church, the government. Just go down the list and dismantling these from within.
Yeah, it's pervasive how it's gotten all around. But there's a key word that you hear. There's a key word that you hear when this stuff comes up in the school arguments and stuff is equity. Is equity equality, ma'am?
Equity is not equality, it means equal results. But I also want to tell you that the arguments that we hear from the critical theorists and the critical race theorists is that critical theory and critical race theory is not being taught in schools. And what they mean is that the forerunners like Dirk Bale, Richard Delgado, and his wife Jean Stefanik, these things are not, these scholars, these early forerunners may not be taught in the public and private schools. There may not be a course on critical race theory, but the ideas of these theorists have been disseminated into K through 12 teaching materials. And so they're in the teaching materials, they're in the books, they're in the videos, they're in the scripts that teachers are supposed to use. And so they may not be teaching a course called critical race theory that you would take at a college or university. You might take it at an elite private school or upper levels of a public school, but those ideas You find it in DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And diversity, equity, inclusion, diversity itself, that concept has been around since the 1980s, maybe 1970s, associated with affirmative action. But back then, it meant that you would send out recruiters to areas where certain groups were underrepresented, and you'd let them know of opportunities to either go to school or to apply for jobs. And so diversity meant that you would try to recruit underserved populations. That's not what it means today. Today, it's about bringing the people together in affinity groups and them keeping their identities within the workplace, within the schools. They become a separate part of the whole. And equity does not mean equal opportunity. When the 1964 Civil Rights Act was passed, um, it prohibited discrimination on the basis of race, color, national origin, religion, sex, and then later disabilities were added. It prohibited discrimination. What you find today with equity, they want you to discriminate in favor of groups they consider marginalized, whether it's women, whether it's homosexuals, whether it's blacks, Hispanics, or Asians. They want you to discriminate in favor of. And the assumption is that white people have had their day. You know, they've structured everything to maintain their power, and that these other groups now have to be included. And within that inclusion, it doesn't mean everyone getting around the table and working together for a common good. No, they really want people to be separate, and they use a conflict model. Out of Marxism is conflict. You can never bring about racial reconciliation or reconciliation between males and females and harmony coming from a conflict model. And Marxism is all about conflict.
Yeah, and in your book you talk about that, and like you talk about how I believe it was Kendi, and I'm paraphrasing, that he said he had talked about that you're gonna need racism to end racism,
Yes, I mean,
or
he says that.
and that is like so antithetical to our civil rights leaders from the past who marched, who went through the struggles to make things better for people of color, and and this is completely antithetical to that.
It's a
um
violation of the law, too. And I want people to realize that when we passed the 1964 Civil Rights Act, it meant all races. It didn't say just that historically disadvantaged groups or black people or Hispanic people were protected from discrimination. It also protected white people. And the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment protects all persons, citizens as well as non citizens. And so, what is happening in America today, what is being pushed in Washington today by the Department of Justice and the president, these run counter to our Constitution and our civil rights laws. They are a violation of the law, and lawsuits are being filed all across the country, and some of them are being settled, they're being won. And I would argue that right now the federal government is engaging in activities that are really illegal and unconstitutional because they're pushing policies and programs that run contrary to our laws and our Constitution.
you talk about how how it's infiltrating our institutions, and you go extensively into what's happening to the Defense Department. Can you kind of touch on that?
I mean, the Defense Department has lost sight of its mission. Because if you think about what is the role of the military, it's to protect citizens against foreign and domestic enemies. But the wokeism that's taken over the U.S. military has resulted in all sorts of things, including a lowering of standards for basic training. Women that are really physically, I don't want to say physically unfit, but they don't meet the standard qualifications, that endangers the lives of their it endangers their lives as well as the people that are depending on them. And then all of this emphasis on um, transgenderism, transgenders, drag shows in the military, on sex. It makes us uncompetitive as a military because when we go to war, we're fighting against other nations where the military is not so distracted by things that have nothing to do with protecting the national security of a nation. And so it puts our military men and women at a disadvantage. It creates all kinds of friction and confusion. And it also, it just weakens us as a nation. What is what uh, what is being argued today in many of the public schools, some of the crazy ideas such as uh, math is racist, or that working hard, getting to places on time, planning for the future, that's whiteness. And so all of these things are to the detriment of anyone who actually believes it and acts on it.
I listened to your part in your book where you talk about the math is racist. Can you touch on that? Because I think the parents of Ellis County would find a kick out of that one. It's ridiculous.
I can tell you that the Gates Foundation funded research about ethnomathematics, and out of that has become the argument and curricula that's been adopted in some places that argues, that math is racist, and that certain groups, depending on their race, they can get a different answer to a mathematical equation. And so you can see how racial and ethnic minorities are any group that struggles with math. And I can tell you from my personal experiences that that is not my forte. I had to do a remedial math. I had to put a lot of time in to get through
Me too.
stats courses. Math I found very difficult because you have to sit down and focus and work out the problems. Math can be very hard if you're not naturally gifted in that way. But that's not what they're telling children. They're telling them that because of the color of their skin, that math itself may be racist in a way that would harm them, and to the extent that it makes young people not turn in their homework, not work out math problems, assuming that they are at a disadvantage because of their race. It means that you're going to have fewer architects, fewer nurses and doctors, fewer scientists, fewer mathematicians. Any field, and that's most fields in America, you have to know math. And so it's putting racial and ethnic minorities at a greater disadvantage than ever before. And I can tell you that when I got my education, we wanted equal opportunity. And so you had an equal opportunity to succeed or fail. And with equity, what is being pushed is an equal outcome, regardless of your effort. And that means that there are people, that are being put in positions. You look no further than some of the people we see in Washington today that are not qualified to do their jobs. They're there because of the color of their skin or their sexual orientation or something that has nothing to do with their abilities. And that's the way our society is moving to its own detriment. And I think that the meritocracy that many of us grew up believing in a meritocracy and people being rewarded for hard work, well, the diversity, equity, and inclusion uh, society, well, they're not a society, but those people that make those arguments and they push those ideas, they very much reject colorblindness. They reject the meritocracy. They want people judged by the color of their skin, their sexual orientation, their sex, and all sorts of things that have nothing to do with their abilities. And that is detrimental to our society and also to the well being of individuals.
Yeah, this really is a collective kind of thing, a religion of sort when it comes to CRT. Kind of in closing, I wanted you to go ahead and address the audience on the book, on your references, because it was a well referenced book and there was some good links in there. So I wanted you to go ahead and just kind of talk about that, ma'am.
Well, I mean, if you listen to the book, you're sort of at a disadvantage because you're not able to see the appendices. And as far as the book, it's a short book as far as books go. And that's because I know that people are busy. They don't have time, to spend hours and hours reading a book. But the book explains what critical race theory is, where it came from, why it runs counter to traditional American values. It runs counter to our Christian, Judeo Christian values and principles, even though it's worked its way into the churches. And we have chapters on critical race theory, the U.S. Constitution, and civil rights law, and strategies for resisting. There are two chapters on how to resist CRT's influence. And one thing is exercising voice. That's what many parents are doing. When you see the parents' movement and parents going to school board meetings and running for office and getting elected, they are exercising voice. The parents will pull their children out of the public schools and either enroll them in private or classical schools, or sometimes they homeschool them. They are exercising exit. So you can exercise voice, you can exercise exit, and then there are people that engage in somewhat what we would call guerrilla warfare. Not warfare in the sense of being violent, but fighting back, maybe on social media through the things you post and through memes and through humor, such as the Babylon Bee, showing how ridiculous that many of the things that are being argued are. That's a way to fight back. So there's one chapter on fighting back, and then there's another one that has to do with proposals for resistant CRT. And very quickly, I'm going to go through those 10 proposals that are really fleshed out in the book. But you need to understand what CRT is, where it comes from, and the different ways it manifests itself. Because most of the time, you'll be told that CRT is not in the public schools, it's not being done, and they keep changing the names. They may call it culturally sensitive learning. They may call it diversity enhancement. They may even sneak it in under civil rights. But there are many different ways that it appears, and they constantly change what they call it, but it's still the same thing. You can challenge, and you're on strong grounds here, the legality and constitutionality of CRT in education and in the workplace. Because if you're a teacher or you're an administrator, a lot of times they're pushing things that violate your civil rights, and you have a legal recourse, and you need to learn how to document when you're being discriminated against. You can organize grassroots movements. Lots of people are doing this. Run for school board, city council, run for mayor. There are different things you can do. And build broad coalitions. This is not conservatives versus liberals. You find that concerns about these issues cut across party lines, cuts across race, ethnicity, and religion. So build coalitions with people who share your values. Everyone loves their child, and there are many parents from different backgrounds who will join forces with you to fight back. And use multiple strategies. You know, some people like to go to town hall meetings and rallies, other people don't. Contact public officials and write letters to the editor, work on social media through your posts, but there are many different ways that you can engage. And then educate your church leaders. There are lots of well meaning church leaders. They don't understand Marxism. They don't understand how they're being manipulated by organizations like Black Lives Matter and Antifa. And they're really forgetting the gospel of Jesus Christ, which is complete, that has everything that we really need to bring about reconciliation across racial lines and also between males and females.
Amen.
Bring pressure to bear on corporations. There are corporations and other institutions that are supporting CRT. You have the power of the purse. You can exert influence if you're a stockholder. Don't forget that you have some power. Stand up to big tech companies. As I'm speaking today, Elon Musk, he's purchased Twitter. He promises to make it a public square that will be fair to different voices. And so that happened because of a revolution of sort. And we should encourage other big tech companies to do the same. Monitor state and local agencies to ensure that they are not using your tax dollars to subsidize racism or sexism or whatever they're doing, but you as a taxpayer, you have a right to speak. And then develop alternatives to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And one of the things that I have done is incorporate or found a new organization. It's a business called Real Diversity,
It's all
Real
good.
Unity Training Solutions, Real Unity Training Solutions to be an alternative. And what's different about my business is that it is very much focused on e pluribus unum, out of many one, as well as making sure that the training is consistent with our civil rights laws and our Constitution. And so that's some of the things. And we list these proposals, but then we also have discussion of them. And the book has a glossary. You know that they're constantly changing the meanings of words, and so it has a glossary explaining different ways that CRT can appear. It also has resources of organizations that you can contact. Like if you're a parent or if you're a teacher and your rights are being violated, there are organizations out there that you can call and get some advice and some assistance. And then we have the model school board language. Like if you're in a state or city where they may be pushing these agendas and you want your legislators to pass a bill that will protect your rights, we have in our appendices an example of legislation that has been passed in other states. So this book, Black Eye for America, How Critical Race Theory is Bringing Down the House, was meant to be read, used, and studied by people that are not scholars, but everyday Americans just looking for some help.
And I plan on getting the actual hardcover version of it because I listened to Audible and it was a great book, man. I really learned a lot. There was a lot I from, and it was very thorough where it came from, how it's affecting minorities in a negative way and bringing us back from all the progress that we made throughout the years. It was an amazing book, and I thank you for writing it. Anyway, I really thank you for coming on my show, ma'am. I'm a little guy, and you gave a little guy a chance. I hope you enjoyed yourself. I hope I can have you back to talk more about that, because I appreciate your knowledge, ma'am, and I appreciate your time.
But thank you. And if you contact my assistant, we'll be happy to mail you a signed copy of Black Eye for America.
Oh my
So
God, I'm
save
not,
your
I'm not,
money.
I'm not worthy. I'm not worthy. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you so much for coming on, ma'am.
All right. Bye.